Welcome, everyone, and happy International Women's Day 2024. So excited to be with you today to celebrate this wonderful day that for me is a fun holiday. And since I'm not a mother, this is kind of like my Mother's Day, I'd say. So I want to mention a few things that just as we go forward. We are going to talk about Wisdom from the Purple Parachute, which is a book I wrote. I'll talk a little bit about why I wrote the book. I'll share some fun facts about International Women's Day, and we'll do an activity, and I'll share some resources, and that will cover our time today. I want to send a few things out to everyone, just so you know that there is a free download of my book, and I'm putting it in the chat right now so that you can obtain a workbook that basically has all of the activities from the Purple Parachute and exercises and questions in one place. So if you want all the meat, no potatoes, then you can download the workbook. If you're someone who likes to hear stories and more elaboration, then the book is for you because it has lots of stories about women making career transitions. So let me take 1 second to just put these links in here. If you want to purchase the book, you can go to my website at paulabrand.com and then click on my book. Or you can also go to www.purple-parachute.com. So those are just a few of the things that you can do with the resources that I've shared. The other link I just put in is for a class that I'm running that starts next week, and you can still sign up until Sunday. After Sunday, the registration will close, and it's a class on career clarity, which is really very, very much similar to what the book is all about. And so that's in the chat as well. And the last link I just put in the chat is if you want to sign up for brand career management communications. The link is there, but you can also, of course, do that by going to paulabrand.com and clicking to sign up for communications there. So that's some of the housekeeping that I wanted to get out of the way. And without further ado, let's jump into the content. And for those of you, we are recording this. So for those of you who might be listening to this after March 8th, feel free to grab a pen and paper because we will be doing an activity closer to the end. And I'd like for you to participate in that as well. Okay, so let's start with, what does career development mean to you? Feel free to put your answers in the chat box. And this is something that can be personal or broad. Career development can involve career management or career development. They're similar, but they're slightly different. So anything that comes to mind for you in terms of what career management or career development means to you. I'll give you a quick second to do that while I take a sip of water. I know sometimes it's hard to think of things and type them in the chat box quickly enough. So I will elaborate on a few things here as answers come in. Most people say training and skill development, which are two very important things in career development. I think it's also a matter of figuring out what are your favorite skills that you like to use and what are your best skills. So the things that you're really good at, but also enjoy and excel in. So those are two different things. You enjoy them and you're good at them. And those are important. Michelle said evolving, growing through the bumps in the road of discovering myself and my worth. And that is really important, Michelle. I think evolution, we all have, we will have many careers in our lifetime, all of us, not just one. And sometimes it's bits and pieces and you don't even feel like it's a career, but when you look at it in the big picture, you see themes. And so that's usually important. Even if you might have had a part-time job here, a part-time job there while you're raising kids, things like that, there's still often a theme to be found. So career development can mean the themes that come to you during your career, putting the dots together, if you will, connecting the dots, evolving, growing, all of these things involve career development. So thanks for your answers. And I hope that today we'll talk about career development and some ways that you can be more intentional about your career development and how you can evolve and discover yourself. The big part is discovering yourself and figuring out what what makes you tick, what you're really good at, what are your interests. And we'll get more into that in a little bit, so I'll hold off on that. Let's share a little bit about herstory and how International Women's Day came to be. In 1908, on March 8th, this actual date in 1908, women workers protested about unfair working practices and voting rights. And so that was the impetus that culminated in today's International Women's Day. And in the UK, in that same year, women wore purple, green, and white. So that's why I'm wearing purple today. This was a new fun fact that I had learned in the past year about the colors. I didn't understand that there were specific colors associated with International Women's Day, and purple and green have become the two enduring colors and symbols. Green is for hope, and purple is for women's equality. And so, yeah, and then of course it became more international because the UN got involved and they created a charter in 1945, and that was when the first official International Women's Day was observed through the UN in 1975, actually on March 8th. So that's how it came about, and now every year, many women, men, people of all gender celebrate International Women's Day around the globe. And it's always on this day, so it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It's always going to be March 8th. And there's two major organizations that lead the celebration, if you will. One is based in the US, and there's a link to their website on this slide. And I will send a copy of the slide to everyone who has registered. And there's also an organization in Australia that celebrates International Women's Day. In fact, I think it's called the International Women's Day .org of Australia, and they come up with their own theme. So the theme for the US group is Inspire Inclusion, and the theme for the Australian-based group is Count Her In. But in both cases, there's a nice theme for the event, and every year there's a theme. I see someone new has joined us, and so I want to welcome Carrie. And we are recording, Carrie, just so you know. So if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them as we go along or put them in the chat. But if you don't have a question, if you don't mind muting yourself when you're not talking. And
Thank you very much. Thanks, Paula.
You're welcome. And you don't have to worry about video because only my face will show in the recording, just so you know. Okay, before we jump to the next slide, I do want to ask if anyone in the audience has a burning question about International Women's Day or anything we're going to talk about. And I'll pause for a second to see if anyone wants to put anything in the chat box. While we're pausing for that, I'm going to reload the links that I sent earlier of how you can obtain a workbook that has all the questions and exercises from the book in it, and you just have to share your email. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm going to keep moving forward just in the interest of time, make sure we stay within the hour. But please add any questions at any point if it has anything to do with International Women's Day or career development or your career. To share a little bit about me, I think many of the people on the Zoom right now do know me, so I'll just be quick about this. For people who are listening later who might not know me, I have experience in human resources, workforce development, and career advising across about 20 years of work. I do have a master's in industrial organizational psychology and 4 industry certifications. They are a mouthful, so I will not say what they are, but you could find out more about them on my website, or you could ask me later. The initials after my last name tell you what my certifications are. And I run brand career management, which I call BCM as an acronym. I help individuals and I help organizations from around the globe. Now, I do only focus on people who are trying to get jobs in the US, but I have worked with people from all parts of the world who happen to be looking for employment in the US. But I'm not an expert on getting jobs in other countries. So I usually refer those out when those come to me. But I've had the pleasure of working with people from many different countries, and it always excites me to learn about new cultures and work with people from all around the world. I was born and raised in New York, just above New York City. I lived in Maryland for most of my life, and now I'm currently based in Marietta, Georgia, and I am very nomadic and a world traveler. I've been to 29 places. I say places because some places are just an island, not an entire country, but 29 places and 6 continents, which I love. And I currently, my husband and I sold our house in Annapolis in 2021, and now we live a somewhat nomadic life based in Marietta for elder care reasons, but travel as much as we can in our Winnebago Fuse, which I'm in right now, which also works as my office when we're not traveling. So that's a little bit about me. People often ask, why did I write the book? And so let me address that in a few ways. The main reason was to demystify career management and career transition because they are not rocket science, but they can be very overwhelming and confusing if you don't know how to go forward. And I was lucky enough to be raised by 2 parents who are entrepreneurs, but specifically my dad was a recruiter, an executive recruiter, headhunter. So I learned a lot of things that are common sense to me about career management, but are not to most people because they didn't have a dad who was an executive recruiter who made them complete resumes at the age of 15. So I like to share that information because I feel like if people have the information, it can very much help them. There's not a special skill you need or some degree that you need in order to manage your career well. It just takes intention and knowledge. And so I wanted to put that knowledge out in the world and see if it can help people, which so far it has, which makes me very happy. There's a lot of resources in the book, tons of free resources, and I'll talk about some today as well, especially for assessments. So we'll get to those in a little bit, but just know that there's tons of resources in the book. And again, a lot of them are free, which is another reason I want to share them with the world. I love supporting women, empowering women, and I do everything I can to empower women and equal the playing field, whether it's helping someone get a job or negotiate a higher salary. All of that is really my passion. And so the book fed into my passion where I can help people, but I can also benefit my own satisfaction of knowing I've helped people. And finally, I wanted to reach more people because you can only meet so many people one-on-one or even talking to groups, but a book can reach anyone in the world. And so that was one of the main reasons, is just to put all of that information in one place so people can access it. I do want to mention before we move further that I want this to be a safe environment. So when we do the activity, I'm going to ask you to stick to positive words, and whether they're about yourself or others. I would like people to be in a non-judgmental frame of mind and a good mindset, and only share when comfortable. I'll ask you to share things, but no one has to. So only do so if you want to. And maybe just take a deep breath right now and just calm down for a minute, because careers can make people anxious, but they don't need to. So let's take a deep breath and we'll move forward on celebrating International Women's Day. Right now on this slide, I'd just like you to ask yourself and fill in the chat box a letter A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Last year, I had, I think, 4 or 5 options, but based on a lot of feedback over the past year, I have made these much more specific and more answers. So if you don't mind taking a minute to just put in the letter that is most appropriate for where you are right now in your career. Okay, so we have some people who are retired or some are retired. and some folks who are looking for a job, potentially making a career change. And when we talk about career change, in the past year, I've read a book called Switchers, which I highly recommend for anyone who is going to make a career change. And it is a great book because it focuses on whether you're going to change what you have to do in order to make this pivot, but it also breaks it down because if you're just going to change your role or you're just going to change your industry, those are still hard, but not as hard as changing both your role and your industry at once. That is probably the most challenging pivot to make and switch to make. So I do recommend that book if you are planning to make a career change. I will say this, my book, they complement each other. My book assumes you don't know what you want and helps you figure that out first. Switchers, the book Switchers starts with assuming you know what you want and that you know you want to change and takes you from there. So I wouldn't read that book until you've made that decision because that's where it's going to start, and you might be confused and feel lost if you haven't come to that decision. So if you don't know what you want, I'd read my book first. And if you know what you want and you know you're going to make a change, I would also read Switchers. So depending on where you are, there's a lot of choices here, and people can be in all different phases of their career. I've created something called the Astor model, and I'd like to introduce it to you because no matter where you are right now in your career, it can be helpful. And I think especially for those of you looking for a new job or making a career change, but even those of you who are semi-retired or retired, I've gotten feedback about my model being very helpful, even with deciding where to volunteer or just deciding where to put your energy right now, which might not necessarily be an income producing venture. So I use career loosely. I think a career can be in philanthropy or something where you're not actually necessarily bringing in an income, but you are impacting the world. Before we go into the model, I just want to share a story I call Miserable Madeline. And of course, Madeline's not really her name, but I think this is just one story from one client, but I think it can be very relatable to other women. I was working with a woman and she had been teaching for 12 something years. She had been awarded teacher awards and really loved what she did for many, many years, but she was starting to burn out. And the administration wasn't feeling very supportive of her. She wasn't feeling very supported by the administration. And one day there was an incident in a classroom and it upset a parent and things got a little escalated. And when my client was pulled into the office, the principal's office, with the parent, it was clear that the principal was not going to support my client, the teacher, and was going to do whatever it took to appease the parent. And that was the tipping point. Later, when my client was meeting with her boss, the principal, she basically said, "I'm at the end of the school year, I'm going to quit." And so things had just sort of built up to where she just said it. And then, of course, as soon as it came out of her mouth, she was in a panic, thinking, "Oh my gosh, what did I just say? I'm not even sure what I want to do." And so on. But she didn't take it back. She realized this is something that had to happen. It had been building up for some time. So she took some matters into her own hands. She did some of the exercises that are in the book and basically figured out she liked teaching. She just didn't want to teach in a high school, in a private high school anymore, and figured that instructional design was a good pivot. And that makes a lot of sense because instructional design and teaching are very similar transferable skills are needed in both of those jobs. It's just mostly that your audience changes. So instructional designers, everything's online and you're more creating content and making videos, whereas in a high school, you're more making lesson plans and it's all in person, things like that. So she went to an open house for the University of Maryland at Baltimore County, found out they had an instructional design program, applied, got in, excelled, completed the work while she was doing other part-time work, sometimes in some internships. And in the end, she made a great career move. She loves where she is right now. She's doing curriculum development for a very reputable and dare I say worldwide famous institution. And she loves it. And it's so great. But there was a time when she was very doubtful and worried that she would be able to make this pivot. She was worried about her age. She's in 50s. And she was also worried about, she was looking at it as such a dramatic career change. And I explained to her that it was really a tweaking of the skills she already had. And that built her confidence and helped her move forward. And after a couple of stops and starts, she got her foot in that new field. And like I said, she's really excelling and loving it. So you can make career changes. It's not impossible. It does take some work. You do need to figure out what the next thing will be, but it is doable. So I hope that story about miserable Madeline, who is no longer miserable with her job, and she was never miserable in life. It was really her job that was making her miserable. But she made the change, and so can you. So I hope that you find that inspirational. Let's look at the Aster model itself and just talk a minute about that. There are 5 phases of this book, and that's how the chapters are structured. And this is how all the content is structured. So it starts with assessing. I'm going to get a little deeper into that in the next few slides, but let's just say for now that you first have to know, what are your values? What is your personality? What are your interests? What are your best skills? What are your superpowers? And what are all those pieces of data pointing to? And it might be pointing to many things or just a few things, but the next step is to seek out information. So that's the S in Aster, is to take all of those things that are coming up from the assessments and flush them out and decide, how much money would I make in these roles? Does this job exist or this career exist where I live? And if not, am I willing to move where it's more vibrant? And of course, do you have the education and skills and training to do this job right now? Or do you need to gain them? And how would you gain them? So that's what you figure out in the seek phase, if you will. Seek out also involves talking to people, human beings who actually do the work you think you want to do. And really, research on the internet and books is great, but talking to a human being who actually does the work you think you want to do is one of the most powerful things that you can do for your career. You're not asking for a job. You are merely asking for information to make an informed career decision. And that's how you need to look at it. You're not bothering people. You're not asking for much. You're just asking for their time to talk for maybe 30 minutes to learn a little bit about the career and the job so that you can assess whether this really is a good fit. And then test, the T in Aster, is when you can test out roles. Now, you can't test out every role. You can't test out being a spy. You can't test out being a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, because of obvious reasons for the spy. But for the CFO, no one's going to give you access to that type of sensitive data as a volunteer. But there are so many jobs that you can volunteer for, that you can learn informally from other people, where you can do internships or midternships or returnships. These are all new ways or old ways of gaining experience and getting exposure to a job without having to fully commit and applying and taking a paid job doing that thing. So let's see, that's all about test. A question came in, Carrie was asking, did Madeline have a master's degree? Actually, I'm trying to remember. I don't think she did, but I'd have to double check. What she got at UMBC was actually a certification in instructional design. So it was a shorter term than an actual degree, but I will have to get back to you on that, Carrie, because I don't have the data right in front of me. I wish I could remember if she had a master's or not, but the program enabled her to jump into this instructional design sufficiently. And as I'm talking about it, I feel like it was a 2-year program, so maybe it was a master's.
I was asking, I'm sorry, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Okay. I was asking on the educational side if she had gone for her master's.
Right. I understand your question, and I just
Yeah,
don't have it
you
in
don't know.
front of me, the
Okay.
facts while we're doing this.
Okay.
I think as I'm starting to think more about it, I think she had a master's and this was a certification program for instructional design.
Okay.
But the length of time it took her to complete it makes me feel like it was a master's program. But that could have been because she was working part-time as she was doing it. So I promise I will get back to you with that answer,
Okay.
but I can't give it to you live right now on the event.
Sure. Sure, I understand. I was just thinking that if she did, didn't that kind of give her a leg up in making this pivot?
Right. That's why I think she had the master's, because she wasn't, I think she would have been more confident. Um, and my memory is that she might have had to have the master's to do the teaching in the first place. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't really have the right answer for you. I'm going to write it down, Carrie, and I'm going to get back with you about whether she had the master's. I will say I'm going to backtrack a minute here and just not backtrack, but get off topic of the Astor model for a minute, because I think this might address what you're really asking me, Carrie, which is, is it wise to go get a master's to pivot? And a lot of people ask that question, and I think it might be, but you have to do a lot of research, because to get a master's, a lot of people come to me for career advice and they think that getting a master's in something is the answer. And when I ask them what they're going to do with it, they don't actually know. They just think getting a master's is going to be a magic ticket, a silver bullet to getting a new job. And that's not true. You really have to know what you're going to do with the master's degree. So I caution against just jumping into a master's as a solution for a career pivot. I think first you need to talk to people, human beings who do the work you want to do. And that's one of the questions you can ask them, which is, do I need a master's to do this job? There's many jobs where people think you need a master's, but in reality, you don't. Like IT, they don't really care if you have a master's in information systems. They more care, can you do the work? Do you have the certifications? And so for someone to say, oh, I have to get a master's in IT before I can jump into becoming, the next step or pivoting into IT is actually probably not true, and maybe a waste of a lot of time and money. So, Carrie, am I right that that was maybe at the heart of your question is, how much education do I need to fill a gap before I pivot?
Uh, yes, indeed, it did. But originally, as you had indicated, I was thinking that if she had her master's in education previously for her job and she went for this other certificate, would the master's still give her a leg up as an educational thing, that she could prove that she could do graduate level work and things like that. So,
Right. I think, yeah, it kind of depends on the field. Certainly, usually, in most cases, a master's will make you more qualified than most people if the average person in that field doesn't have a master's and it's not required. But there's certainly plenty of times where a master's or like a PhD can make you seem overqualified. And so there are times where you might not use the leverage of your further education because it might make employers think that you're overeducated, that you're going to ask for too much of a salary or that you have too much experience. So things can go both ways. And with a lot of career questions, I often say it depends. And that's really true. You can't blanketly say, oh, yes, a master's degree will always give you a leg up. It often will, but not always. And a lot of people say, oh, I have to have a master's to get into this field. And a lot of times that's not true once they do the research. So hopefully those thoughts have helped you process that information. And I promise I will get back to you because now I'm curious myself. And at 54, my memory is rusty. So I'm going to go back and get back with you on whether she had a master's or not.
thanks
And
again.
yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So jumping back into the Astor career model, the next phase is execute. That's what the E stands for in Astor. And execute could be a lot of things, mainly three things, really. It's either going to be execute getting a new job, or opening a business as an entrepreneur, or developing in place. And developing in place means that you might keep the job where you are, but something needs to change, whether it's your duties, your responsibilities, your day-to-day responsibilities, things like that. The time that it makes the most sense to develop in place is maybe you love your boss and you love your employer and you're on a great team and you have seniority. Maybe you've built up a pension. So there's a lot of incentives to stay at this employer, but you're miserable in your job and you're burned out on the skills you're using. And so that's where developing in place is the most appropriate, to stay where you are in terms of who's paying you, but to pivot into something different. And with big employers, that can be easier because a big employer is going to have lots of different roles that you might be able to pivot into. I think it's going to be hard to develop in place in, say, an employer that has 10 to 15 employees. That's going to be a lot harder. The options will be fewer. But that's developing in place is probably the least common choice that most people I see take. A lot of them start their own businesses, and then a lot of them are looking for actually landing another job. Some are doing both. You can do things simultaneously. You can look for a job and look to start your own business. I often say it's best to get a steady income and secure that first and then start the business. I started my business when I was working full time, and it wasn't until things got too much on my plate that was my signal to say, okay, it's time to take the leap and just go 100% into entrepreneurship. I think it's a little risky to just jump into entrepreneurship if you don't have another source of income, or you don't have a partner that is providing income, or you have some other way to pay your bills. So the execute chapter, I believe it's chapter 10. So the execute chapter talks about which is your path and what are you going to, how are you going to execute it? And then chapter 11 goes specifically into job search, because I'd say majority of the people looking at the book and the Astor model are going to be looking for a job of some sort. And then R is repeat, because we're all going to have to do this multiple times in our life. No one, I know a few people still in my circles who have had one job for many years. Most of them are friends of my siblings who are older. I'm the youngest of 6. I don't think I have any contemporaries in that situation. And that is really going away. That's not really existing anymore. So that's an unrealistic dream if your goal is to work for one employer for even probably 15 years. These days, ONET, which is the US Department of Labor website and provides a lot of statistics, says that all of us will have multiple careers in our lifetime. At least the younger people who are coming up and developing their careers will have multiple careers, not multiple jobs. And so it is important to go through this cycle, this Astor model, more than once in your life. I know I've gone through it about 4 times in my life, and it's helped me each time to just take stock, figure out where am I, where do I want to go, what do I want, and how am I going to get there? And that's really what the model is all about, which is why I think I have heard people applying it to broader decisions than just career, and that makes sense to me. Carrie says she just read 12 jobs in a lifetime. Okay, but that's just jobs, right? I think there's another statistic about careers. I think it might be 7 careers. And of course, that's for people who are younger and moving forward. I'm not going to have 7 more careers, but I've had at least 4 in my lifetime. And they're similar, right? Workforce development, human resources, career advising are all, to me, different points of the same triangle. It's all about getting people jobs, but they're different industries. So they are different careers in some ways, where someone might have a very drastic difference going from, like I can think of someone who went from being a surgeon to being an HVAC technician, which sounds like a very bizarre change. But basically, he loved using his hands, and he loved, figuring out what was wrong and fixing it. But he just was tired of the pressure of being a surgeon in life and death situations. And so this HVAC job was something he could easily do. He had the skills, they were transferable, and it didn't involve life or death situations. So you can have a very seemingly drastic change or be in different careers that are related, either one. But the key really is transferable skills in that situation. What are my transferable skills that I love to use and I'm very good at? And what are other places that need those skills, or other employers, or other ways I can apply them? Thank you for looking that up, Carrie. It's nice to have a research person on the back end double fact checking for me. I appreciate it. Let's go into a little bit more about the A. The A in assess is something that you can't really skip. A lot of people want to skip it, but if you don't know what you want, you have to go through that work to figure out what you want. And assessment is really at the heart of that. And I have another acronym. I love, as you can tell, flowers and gardening. And I think they offer such great metaphors for career management. And so I use vines. And your vines are what you will look for when you are in the assessment in that A first letter of the Astor model. And these are the things you're looking for. what are my values? What are my interests? What is my natural disposition? And what are my superpowers is what I call the exceptional qualities. And what are my transferable skills? Now, you'll have other skills like job related skills, such as drawing blood, for someone like a phlebotomist or a nurse, but those are very specific. Those can only be transferred into a few other jobs in healthcare. So that's really job related. The transferable skill would be being able to interpret data, right? Whether it's blood type or something else. So when you're looking at transferable skills, you're looking at broader things. Like a job related skill would be using a forklift, but the transferable skill would be using machinery. So you can see how you can use some job related skills in a transferable way, but the transferable skills is really key for any transition. So I know, Carrie, I think you had mentioned looking at possibly making a switch. So you're going to really want to zoom in on your transferable skills. That's where it's going to be the heart of the work that you're doing. But the other things are also important. Values are so important, and a lot of people discount them. They don't understand how they can affect your career. But just to give a very simplistic example, if you are eco-friendly and believe in the environment, and there's a great job at a local employer that's polluting your local river, you might kind of rationalize, well, I'm just going to be the accountant at that company. But I would argue that your values of respecting the earth and environment are going to conflict with the values of that company, which if they're polluting, that's obviously not a value. That might be a value they state, but it's not a value they're living. And even being an accountant there is going to eventually make you sick to your stomach when you go into work, because values really need to align. So you have to figure out first, what are my values? And that really takes prioritizing them. And that's what I do when I work with people. We do a card sort. So most people can maybe list 5 values they hold, but the hard part is what's number 1 and what's number 2. So that's really the exercise with values. Interests, there's an assessment I'll show you in the next slide. Actually, I'm going to move to the next slide just because this slide has some resources that are free where you can assess some of these things. So for values, there's viacharacter.org. Now that is broad life values, which is a good place to start. On my website, if you go to my homepage, my website is paulabrand.com. Towards the very bottom, there's a free work values inventory. And I would suggest doing both, because life values are broad, like value, family, education, safety, things like that. But work values are going to be more specific to career, such as I want to make an impact in the world. I want to make the most money possible. I want to be respected for my work. I want to have work-life balance. These are more, I'd say, career or work values. And so you do want to drill it down. Even if you start with the broad life values, you do want to drill it down to work values to help you make career decisions. The interest profiler, that is a free resource through the ONET and the US Department of Labor, and that gives you a Holland code. I'm not going to get into the Holland code because I want to make sure I stay on time, but that's just a way. I will say this: if you know your Holland code, you can look up jobs that have the same Holland code or similar. That can point you in the right direction. For your personality, 16personalities.com gives you a Myers-Briggs type and a little bit like a report, like a free report about how your personality plays out in life and work, things like that. And then for superpowers, there's a free assessment called The Standout by Marcus Buckingham. I am realizing right now as we speak that he changed his website, and I meant to change this link, and I apologize that I didn't. So instead of using this link, I would Google Standout Assessment Marcus Buckingham, and you'll get to the new link. It's not redirecting when you use this old link, even though he still has a website and it's still a free resource. And that will give you the top 2 out of the 9 categories of superpowers for people. And then agilities.org is another free resource that is available to help you assess your transferable skills. So there are other assessments out there. Sub cost money. These are the best ones I found that are free for these types of things that you're trying to figure out in your vines. And any questions? Let me just take a quick pause and make sure that we don't have any questions before we jump into our activity. Okay, let's jump into the activity. And I think I'll pause here. I'll explain the activity, then I'll hit pause on the recording so that people aren't having to um, sit through us filling out the paper. So for this activity, I'd like you to grab a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be that big. You're going to make 3 columns on it. You're going to only use positive words, and I'm going to walk you through it. And I just realized I can't pause it. I'll have to keep going. But I would say if you're listening to this later, you can fast forward the part where we're waiting for people to write their answers. So if you have your piece of paper, I'd like you to write me or myself or something like that in the first column. And what I want you to do, and I'm going to set a timer here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is come up with 8 words that describe you. 8 positive words that describe you. That's all I'm asking. And put them in column number 1. And I'm going to hit the timer for 2 minutes. And actually, I will hit pause on the recording for a minute. Okay, thank you for filling out the first column. Now for the second column, I'd like you to write boss or employer, but boss is usually easier, supervisor. And I'd like you to think, this time you only have to come up with 4 words, so it's a little easier. But the trick is you can't repeat any of the 8 words that you already put in the column that you think about yourself. And they do have to still remain positive. So 4 positive words that a current or former, any boss in your lifetime of your career might have used to describe you or might currently use to describe you. So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes to come up with those 4 words. And we'll run it the same as we did before. I'm going to pause the recording. If you finish early, feel free to let me know that. Okay, for the last column, I'd like you to put friend or colleague. You can put friend/colleague. And I'd like you to think of 4 more words that a friend or colleague would use to describe you, but the same rules apply that you can't use any of the former words in the other 2 columns. So 4 words that are positive that a friend or colleague would use to describe you. And I'll set it. I think at this point, I'm not going to bother setting it because I'm just going to keep the recording going, and you guys write finished when anyone in the audience is done, since you've been a fast group. For those of you who might be listening to this after March 8th, feel free to forward ahead 30 seconds or so, or a minute. Okay, I think I got a few finished already. So I'll give a few more seconds, and then hopefully all of you have had a chance to finish it up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I want to just debrief this activity for a little bit. It seems like a simple activity on the one hand, and on the other hand, people often have a hard time with it, coming up with the words and not repeating words and thinking of positive words. So I'd like to ask today's audience if you are willing to share answers to any of these questions. You can put them in the chat box or you can unmute yourself. And these are the questions. What is one word you selected and how does it fit you? Did you discover anything during this exercise? Was it hard or was it easy? And did you uncover any words that surprised you? Every once in a while, someone comes up with a word that sort of hit them by surprise, but just happens in the moment. And sometimes they really like that word and decide to use it in their branding. Sometimes, one time, someone came up with a realization that all the words they came up with were very contrary to what the current work they were doing. And it made them realize that they were in the wrong in the wrong field or job. And this exercise sort of brought that about for them. But let me just pause for a second and ask anyone in the audience right now if you're willing to share any answers to any of these questions. And of course, as I said in the beginning, if you don't want to share or some of you are on the move and not able to, that's okay too. So one person said it's easy to complete, just reread reference letters. Okay, well, if you just reread reference letters or, old employer reviews, that should help. You should see themes. That's a great way to get some feedback, is to look at old employer reviews, especially if you worked at a place year after year and you can see patterns and words repeating. Someone shared adaptive, quickly learn from new and old situations, enjoyable. Okay, those are all good words because you're always going to have to learn no matter what the job is. And people always want to be around someone enjoyable. And adaptation is really probably, you can call it agility or adaptation, but really in today's career world, that is the key, to be able to adapt. And someone else said they use different words for each, but the same theme. Okay. And so that's often the case, that the theme, this is one way to see a theme emerge. And the more you do these types of exercises and the more you look at it from different angles, like you do an exercise to assess your personality and you do an exercise to assess your values, I'd say this is probably helping you get insight into your superpowers, because you're looking at things that people see in you and you see in yourself. Someone said, all my careers have been directed to write my own performance reviews. Okay. So then this exercise is really important for you, because the words, you're not going to have an employer review to look at them. So it's going to be important for you to make your own recollections and make those words come to life and then see the themes. So thank you everyone for your answers. I want to also have you leaving with this question, which is, how might you use this information about yourself in your career management? And I would say, in the essence of time, I'm going to say it, just give some ideas, but feel free to write in the chat if you have others. You can use this type of information to describe yourself in an interview. When someone asks you, tell me about yourself, you could use some of these words like adaptable, enjoyable to be around. You can also use some of those words in your career summary or profile on your resume. You can use some of them in branding on your LinkedIn profile. So there's lots of ways, once you draw this information out, and then of course you compare it to, okay, these are the things about me that are true. Now, what jobs match those things, meaning what jobs need these truths? Then that's where you start to take this information and move it forward for your career. Now, I know we're coming to the top of the hour, so I do want to get through the last few slides, and then I'm happy to stay and answer any questions that might come up. Before I do that, one person said, I consider my own positive word is empathetic, which is a buzzword today. I've always been that, and it has always been true for me, but now I feel like at long last it's in my favor. Yes, empathy is an important word, and you're right. And in today's world, I think it is more important than ever. And she says she's also written reference letters for herself. And so, that's I love that theme. That's never come up in another webinar I've done, but I love that idea. of assessing yourself, because you know yourself better than anyone else. It can be helpful if you're stuck to ask other people what they think of you. And of course, I caveat that with, you might have an anomaly, bad feedback or bad boss who gave you mean feedback that wasn't even really true. So that's why you look for themes. You look for things that repeat, because you don't want to let one bad situation kind of throw you off on your game. Michelle said, your passion brings enormous value to the universe, particularly the universe of women. I look forward to seeking out more of your worth. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's wrap it up here because it's top of the hour. I want to just mention that I'm running a class, and this Sunday is the deadline for registering. And it's basically a lot of similar to what we did today, where it's 6 sessions, and each session is going to be figuring out your values, your interests, your skills, all the things we talked about today, and seeing what are those themes that are speaking, and what are the guideposts and beacons that are shining light on the qualities that you hold and what careers would be a good fit. So the link is at the bottom. I also will share a link at let's see, I also can share, let me just share the link in the chat box in case it's not easy to cut and paste my screen. And I'll stay on again to ask any questions about this class or about anything that we've gone over today. I'm going to stay and answer any questions, but let me just end on the last slide here, which has all of my ways to contact me through social media, online, and then it also has the last at the bottom. It looks like I forgot to put the link, but I've already shared the link in the chat to sign up for my communications, so I won't worry about that. You have a link also to the Purple Parachute workbook in the chat as well. So let's go back to just asking if there's any questions. I am going to stop recording, and let me just do that real quickly. And I just want to say thanks to everyone for celebrating International Women's Day with me today. It's a favorite holiday of mine, and I hope it becomes one of yours as well.